Vroom, vroom! Don't mind me, just trying to imagine how my car engine will sound after I set a new record in Rev Racing. Want to challenge me and other drivers? Well, head over to the Animoca Brands booth and get on the Rev Racing track. May the best driver win. We all love the environment. Well, I know I do. It gives me direct access to air, shelter, and of course, fresh food. While I love crypto, I am aware of the negative impact activities like mining have on the environment. Let's hear from Daniel Hwang, the head of protocols at Stakefish, and his three panelists on how Web3 is attempting to become more carbon neutral, while at the same time helping build a more sustainable world. Over to you, Daniel.
Hello, GeckoCon. Welcome to this panel on reducing carbon footprint through Web3. I'm joined by our panelists, Joseph Palant from Blockchain for Climate, Gregory Landua from Regen, and John from Toucan. Quickly, I work in blockchain infra, and I've been working with actually all of our panel members for quite some time through the Blockchain Infrastructure Carbon Offset Working Group. And so it's pretty exciting to get a lot of our stories, a lot of what we've been contributing to the crypto and climate space out to the rest of the world. So maybe what we can do is we can quickly start and do some introductions for each other, go into some of what the BitcoWG has been doing in collaboration with all of the panelists, and then maybe go into some of the history recounting the climate crypto ecosystem's evolution and the contributions that each of the panel members have brought. So maybe I'll go clockwise from my screen, Joseph, John, and then Gregory. Yeah, Joseph, if you can quickly introduce yourself, where you came from, how you got here, and then we can go about a lot deeper into what you guys have been doing from your end later.
Thank you, GM, everybody. Thanks so much, GeckoCon. Great to be here. So I'm Joseph Palant, Blockchain for Climate Foundation founder, and I'm based here in Vancouver, British Columbia, the traditional territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh people. And I, though working on Blockchain for Climate Foundation for about 5 years, actually really come from the traditional carbon market. So I started making carbon offset projects back in 2004 with a team submitting the world's first CDM Kyoto reforestation methodology and working onwards through ISO, Verified Carbon Standard, British Columbia's offset standards. And so have really seen the vision and seen the reality of the ability to use carbon markets and carbon offsets to develop projects, quantify the impact, and get them delivered on the ground. And so in being a big fan of that and working on it day in, day out for a mighty long time, when I saw crypto come around, realized that this tool of tokenizing value was a great fit for tokenizing the environmental asset of a carbon offset. It is quantifiable to a sort of fungible unit, a ton of carbon dioxide equivalent, and then looked for a path to do that, looked for a unique use case that was really solving problems that hadn't been solved yet in the climate space. And so to do that, founded Blockchain for Climate Foundation, have an amazing, brilliant team with us there, and then have got to be really part of this discussion around how to use tokens to put carbon on chain, what's the right way to tokenize that, what's the right way to mold and communicate that data. And so our work really briefly is we're building a platform, BitNo platform, to enable national governments to put Paris Agreement carbon markets on the blockchain using ERC 1155 non-fungible tokens. And through the arc of that, have had the really amazing pleasure of meeting the folks from BitcoWG, Blockchain Infrastructure Carbon Offset Working Group, and really the broad crypto climate space that really started to gel from some disparate parts last year in 2021 and is going strong into 2022. So a delight to be here to see this movement moving and to really utilize this beautiful thing of blockchain and crypto that we're probably all here for, to do real world action, to connect all the way down onto the ground to solve real problems that humanity's got to solve. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Thank you, Joseph. And we can definitely get into some terms that we can disambiguate and allow people to understand a lot more in depth. John from Toucan.
Great. Hi, Daniel. Thank you. And good to see everyone else. Yeah, briefly, I am a co-founder at Toucan working on strategy and ecosystem. Toucan protocol exists to unlock climate action at scale. A lot of you probably have heard of us. We created the infrastructure to allow the tokenization of carbon credits onto a blockchain-based registry system that we developed, and that provided the infrastructure that underpinned KlimaDAO and is now kind of developing to underpin a lot of different applications and use cases and protocols working with tokenized carbon. I have a bit of a broad and meandering background that kind of has a couple of recurrent themes. So I've been involved with entrepreneurship for over a decade, various startups and early stage companies roles ranging from co-founder to contractor. And I've also done a fair bit of work in the public and third sectors. So I spent some time as a researcher at a international NGO studying social impact and actually human conflict issues. And then in 2018, I moved to London to pursue a master's degree at University College London in a course called Spatial Data Science and Visualization. This was at a time when I was also getting really, really interested in public blockchains and consensus algorithms and the whole Web3 world. And as I went through this course, studying kind of the breadth and depth of the ways that we measure and map the world, I was also going really deep on decentralized application design and architecture, and thinking and asking myself, how do these two worlds fit together? And this kind of really provided the basis for my involvement in regenerative finance. I honestly didn't really realize it at the time. I just had this intuition that this was a powerful kind of set of technology domains to connect. And it's now kind of being validated by all of the energy and work that's being led by some of the other panelists in using connected sensor networks like satellites, like drones, like IoT devices, to take physical measurements of the world and then use those measurements as the basis for generating some kind of financial instrument like a carbon credit or an eco credit. And so on that basis, I kind of got involved with Toucan over a year ago, well before launch, and here we are. So yeah, I think I don't have a deep carbon markets background, so I'm really excited to pick your brain, Joseph. I suppose all three of you. But I think overall, what really kind of draws me here is this movement and its potential because of how it offers a kind of internet native global coordination tool. We talk about that a lot, right? This sort of a global coordination tool. I'm really keen on continuing to understand what that means and how we can use our financial system, which I kind of think of it as a communication system, right? It's how we transmit value. It's how we send value back and forth and coordinate our activities, how we can use our financial system to make sure that we embed the preservation of the Earth's environments and ecological kind of health into the system. So yeah, really looking forward to the conversation. I hope to do more listening than speaking because I'm just surrounded by such brilliant people, but I'll definitely have a few words to contribute from the perspective of Toucan Protocol.
Thanks so much. Gregory from Regen.
Hello, everybody. Nice to see the folks on the panel. Daniel, thanks for moderating, and hi, GeckoCon. Nice to connect with everyone. I'm calling in from the Berkshires of Western Massachusetts here in New England. And yeah, it's a beautiful sunny day. So my background before jumping, I guess I jumped into Web3 founding Regen Network back in 2017. And before that, my work was pretty squarely focused on regenerative agriculture and agroforestry. And I was doing a lot of work in the development of regenerative supply relationships for large companies that wanted to sort of start to evolve their sourcing to have a climate resilient and climate positive outcome. And there's a lot of other backstory, obviously, but that kind of work in which you're working, you know, I was working very closely with smallholder farmers, mostly with cacao. And I really got a deep dive, you know, about a decade of experience around the challenges of certifying organic or fair trade or scope 3 emissions, like any of the claims related to these sort of long global supply systems were inevitably flawed and challenging. The institutional model is very similar to the institutional model whereby we certify claims related to carbon offsets, for instance, in which you have sort of a bureaucratic institution that is providing trust for a set of actors. And wow, really, really challenging, right? There's a lot of opacity. There's a lot of unwillingness to be transparent. So I sort of started to, and also it's probably useful for listeners to sort of get another little thread of my story, which is starting very early, but you know, specifically grounded back in 2008 when the first the subprime mortgage and then sort of Great Recession took place. What I was doing back then was actually working on local mutual credit currencies and what we were calling financial permaculture. So doing a lot of very hyper local community building and work. At that time, that was pre-Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin, this was like preceding the publishing of the white paper. And then as that emerged, as Bitcoin emerged onto the scene, you know, I was initially very excited and was having these very interesting conversations back then with folks in the bioregional and permaculture movement around the question of if Bitcoin was sort of I guess, sort of the signal that perhaps there could be some sort of cybernetic relationship between ecological health and our financial system and our monetary system and what that might look like. And so I was sort of taking that thread from those early days of this first round of collapse, innovation, you know, Bitcoin, there was sort of a broad grassroots. I mean, Slow Money was born at the same time. The Business Alliance for Local Living Economies, Bali, was born at the same time, the Financial Permaculture Initiative. There was a lot of stuff happening back then. And kind of just took that thread with me for a period of time, really exploring, in my case, really exploring, you know, soil health, biodiversity, like the nitty gritty of how the human economy impacts the greater than human world in ecosystems, in agroforestry projects, in forest conservation projects. And out of all of that sort of emerged this, maybe similar to what John is speaking about, an intuition. And from that intuition emerged, I guess, sort of a vision of the type of trust apparatus, the type of community apparatus that is digital in nature and allows us to connect the dots between ecological health and scientific models of carbon sequestration and land use and the value stream, like how we're assigning value. And if as a society, if we're serious about climate action, we will place a high value on those things that tend to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere, with those things that tend to give us a higher chance of adapting to climate change scenarios, and with those things that mitigate the sort of like the downsides of climate, like flooding or whatever it is. And from that intuition and that vision, Regen Network was born to really start to build public infrastructure for ecological accounting. So at Regen Network, we're really focused on ecological data and how to anchor, sign, standardize that, and sort of build a graph around ecological health data. Ecological claims, how you create a system whereby different stakeholders can make claims about ecological health. In the case of this context, that mostly has to do with carbon storage or carbon sequestration in living systems, and being able to create claims that are verifiably robust enough to count as a carbon unit, right? And then, as I'm sort of saying, that last bit, which is the creation of an asset out of those claims, whereby the community acknowledges that there is a unit of account that represents something that is real and tangible, that everybody agrees is solid, right? And really just creating open, flexible infrastructure so that that process can accelerate and we can create new institutions to support it.
Awesome. Thank you, Gregory. And maybe we can get into some of these terms a little bit later, but just to quickly kind of wrap this up, at least the introductions. So we've all been meeting, all of us on this call weekly on these blockchain infrastructure carbon offset working group calls to figure out how to help coordinate and collaborate in the climate crypto ecosystem to be able to figure out some of these problems together, and also interface with a lot of the Web 2 climate entities that are both interested and curious in how this ecosystem, and specifically Web 3 technology, can be used, as Joseph, John, and Gregory had all described in their introductions. Just a fun story is that, so I work at F2 Pool, and we were the largest Bitcoin mining pool in the world at the time when I was speaking with Gregory on, I think, more infrastructure level conversations, because Gregory's team at Regen had been the ones maintaining the Cosmos SDK for the Cosmos blockchain ecosystem. And our sister company was also Stakefish, which is quite a large proof of stake validator on these chains. And obviously, with the advent of this mass adoption in NFTs and increased attention, there was a lot of scrutiny towards both proof of work and just crypto in general, with sometimes a bit of misinformation, sometimes information that was skewed a bit. And we were trying to do our best to specifically lay down a good foundation from which to kind of build these solutions on, and then communicate that to the rest of the crypto ecosystem, as well as the Web 2 ecosystem. So Yeah, so we actually it was early 2021, and we obviously had this sort of Cambrian explosion of climate crypto projects that came, I think right after or closely after uh, a project called KlimaDAO and also Toucan with John here, um, demonstrated this sort of this pretty quick moving and radical adoption of what can be possible in composable and interoperable ways, specifically on blockchain with carbon credits. But that is something I really am interested in talking about, because I think that there were a lot of different starting points from sort of this climate crypto, um, these climate crypto companies, let's say projects that had varying starting places. And then I think there was this sort of convergence from this public mass adoption. I would be actually curious, maybe it starts with Joseph and Gregory, and then also I think Toucan was also around for quite a bit of time. Um, Maybe we can go around and kind of describe how you are seeing sort of the climate crypto ecosystem starting, and then how you've been seeing the evolution up until, let's say, today, because there's definitely a lot that had happened there. Um, and maybe it was good, maybe it was bad, maybe these are the cards that were dealt with, specifically also the interfacing with the Web2 climate space and how receptive they were before, or maybe how receptive they are now. Maybe we can go around again. But yeah, Joseph, I know you said you had started about 5 years ago, but yeah, we'd love to kind of hear your kind of short take on the history and evolution of the crypto climate ecosystem, and then get each
Yeah,
of those.
big question, lots of stuff to cover there. So I'll try to do a really quick 2017 and then a quick 2021 take. So in 2017, had landed on this, and quite quickly saw that actually when I landed in like late spring of 2017, there was already tokenized carbon offsets on chain. A group called DAO IPCI had done an Ethereum-based tool, the Mito platform, and they were tokenizing verified carbon standard VCUs back in like March 2017, which is pretty profound. They're still working hard today as Evercity, doing neat carbon futures work, and then also enabling creation and origination of green bonds on the blockchain, which is really quite fascinating. And so I'd sort of mentioned that I kind of looked around, and there was sort of a boom in 2017 in this space as well. And this, kind of subsided and had a crypto climate winter aspect to it, and then it sort of reboomed. And the thing that jumped out to me as a carbon market professional was that a lot of the use cases were either trying to solve problems that we'd already solved well in climate, or they were trying to solve problems that we didn't really have in climate. And so that had led me to our work at Blockchain for Climate and focusing on this kind of like fairly distant flame, which is the need to put Paris Agreement carbon market to get Paris Agreement carbon markets going. And with going into the details, it was agreed upon in 2015. The UN rules finally got established, at a high level in 2021, like 6 years later. And it's still going to be some years before we even see the first credit potentially. So we wanted to work on something that was solving a problem that, was really not getting touched or not nearly enough attention. And so we continue on that path, and we have our platform built on Ethereum. And we're now working on building national government clients. But the arc that you were mentioning about the climate crypto space was really fascinating, because I held my original thinking from 2017 that we didn't need crypto to do a bunch of stuff that we do in the carbon world. And that was specific to around the kind of retail and business engagement with carbon offsets. So we've had carbon registries for a long time that allow people to use a standard, issue a carbon credit, have it on a registry so people can see it, make sure it's not double counted. And then retailers and brokers will sell those amongst themselves or sell those to retail and buyers, individuals, businesses. And I thought, crypto isn't really necessary for this piece of the puzzle. We can already do it just fine. And one of the fascinating things that really changed for me actually in 2022 was seeing the work that Toucan's doing and the work that KlimaDAO is doing around, for example, the Klima Infinity, allowing people to retire tokenized carbon offsets, be they Toucan's base carbon tons, C3's UBO and NBO, Moss's MCO2. And this sort of company that launched 6 or 7 months previously had a slick, fully functional system. You could look at the credits you were getting, you could look at the different sort of tokenization you were getting, and do this all from your crypto wallet. And to many, it's kind of arcane to have an Ether wallet or be able to interact on Polygon. But there are millions and millions of people, and probably all of you folks watching this right now, who can do that. And that's orders of magnitude more than people who are able to go and buy a carbon offset off of a traditional carbon registry and retire that. Or even if you don't need to go all the way to that level, people always express, wow, it's kind of difficult to go online and buy a carbon offset from a retailer. And it can be difficult, and it's difficult to have that business model work well enough to provide sort of slick, up-to-date tools. But crypto did that. Crypto did that kind of in the course of a half year. And so this was a really fascinating spot where I didn't think crypto was necessary, but I was wrong. So I'll offer that up as a piece of my experience in the arc of this work.
Yeah, John, would you contribute to some of what you've been seeing with this evolution?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first off, it's amazing to get these perspectives from truly some of the OGs. I've been in the orbit of the blockchain for social environmental impact community since 2017, but I was not at the center of it. So I love those stories, Joseph, of DAO IPCI and kind of the early days of tokenizing carbon credits. I think, a lot of my memories kind of revolve around what has felt to me like a real strong understanding from even the earliest days of the Web3 movement that these technologies had a real part to play in coordinating humanity at a global scale to rise to some of the global challenges that we're facing, and that honestly are kind of cresting right now in this moment of what I think I saw Albert Wenger from USV called the Omni crisis. This just so many different issues are converging at the same time. And I just am every day in awe of it's at the exact moment that these incredible coordination tools are emerging and giving us these really powerful new ways to innovate towards creating adaptation models for ourselves. But, the ones that stand out to me, I remember in 2018, I met Sean Conway from IXO and was just absolutely taken by his vision for this kind of blockchain for impact and using sensors deployed around the world to measure and monitor, children going to school and clean water and, all of these different social and environmental wellness indicators. I also, in ETH Paris 2019, I bumped into a guy who was working with a project called Ibiza Network, which is a risk mutualization system, so similar to an insurance system for smallholder farmers in the global south that uses a global crowdsourced network of people analyzing satellite imagery to assess whether or not crop health is better or worse than average. And if it's worse than average, they get a little payout. And this kind of gives them income security and kind of has pointed, it really unlocked a lot for me to understand how a lot of the early real substantial uses of blockchain are going to be where these kinds of financial services can be offered to a part of the market that's not actually addressed by the incumbent system because it's just not profitable, right? It's not profitable for insurance companies to send people out to these communities that they might be collecting a few $100s a month from, right? But I think as I've kind of watched it develop, I kind of think of this in sort of two categories, right? One is greening crypto, improving or decreasing the environmental impact of operating the kind of infrastructure. And, Crypto for Climate Accord is a great example of this commitment to bring carbon neutrality to the crypto industry. That to me is a really important piece, especially for the narrative. I mean, obviously, because crypto does have an outsized environmental impact, but also for the narrative and kind of helping the rest of the world understand that it costs energy to run any digital infrastructure. It costs run energy to watch Netflix film. It costs energy to send an email. But that doesn't mean that we don't have an uphill battle and some sort of debt to repay there. But what I'm getting more excited about, and I think what we're particularly focused on at Toucan, is how does Web3 enable new ways to green the world, right? How are these global coordination tools and these hyper efficient financial environments or ecosystems enabling us to create new adaptations to the issues that we face? And really, I mean, a lot of it is about deploying what's going to end up being trillions of dollars to the people that are on the ground doing the work that needs to be done to stabilize the atmosphere. And so, this is a really important thing to get right, and it's a really important argument to hone. And I'd really love as well all three of yours kind of feedback and input here. Why should carbon markets, environmental asset markets run on public blockchains? Why is this important? And I think for me, I really think about it not only from an ethical perspective, that it's so important that this is open and transparent and accessible infrastructure, because it should be, but also from a kind of more business case perspective. When these markets run on open blockchains, they have these kind of really unusual and sometimes difficult to describe benefits, like the notion of composability, right? The fact that Toucan protocol exists on the Polygon blockchain, and Toucan Carbon can automatically plug into any other decentralized finance protocol. And as an asset class that runs on a blockchain, carbon credits inherit this enhanced utility that they don't get if they live on a kind of centralized database as a registry. That's, I think, a really, really powerful kind of message to hone. This is all kind of, I think, so I guess my last comment is, I think it's important to recognize that timing is a really significant piece of this, right? Joseph, you raised the point of tokenized Vera VCUs in early 2017. What's the difference between that and Toucan? I'm sure there's, I'm not so familiar with that particular project myself. I'm gonna have to dig into it. But the one significant thing is just the moment, right? The fact that KlimaDAO launched at this absolute kind of height of the 2021 cycle, and so many people had kind of gotten familiar with this idea of tokenizing something or transferring these assets across a bridge. And now that we've had that kind of demand signal from the crypto markets, everybody in the carbon markets are thinking to themselves, wow, this is actually a pretty significant factor that we have to consider in this. And at the same time, regulatory clarity is evolving. We obviously have still a long way to go, but it's evolving. People's understanding of the space is developing. You're seeing leaders in The Economist that are explaining about decentralized finance. And I think all of this is just the natural progression of new technologies moving from the fringe into the collective consciousness, and people becoming more familiar with these ideas, them proving over time that they're here to stay. And that all, to me, kind of means that the moment is ripe for us to be working together to really advocate for Web3 as a key piece of this kind of climate response, this global climate response that we need to mount. One of the messages that I really hone in on is, look, we can't afford to cut out any innovation, right? We all need to be thinking creatively about how to approach this problem, which means we need to create some kind of certainty within the crypto world that we're going to have a lane to experiment and develop with certain safeguards in place, right? And I think there's a balance to strike there. So overall, I've been, I think, things are progressing nicely. If you think about it, 5 years, that's not that long, especially in sort of financial innovation. So things are progressing nicely, and we're doing a lot at Toucan, and I know as are you at Regen and Gecko WG and Blockchain for Climate Foundation to build bridges and build relationships and educate people that aren't so familiar with Web3 technologies to help understand some of the benefits and some of the risks, right?
Thanks so much, John. Yeah, Gregory, I'd be really curious to hear how you're seeing this evolution, specifically because, right, Regen is this L1 blockchain that I think touched upon a lot of what John had actually been doing with like this geospatial research, and seems beyond just like the tokenization of carbon credits.
Yeah, I mean, let's see. So we started in some ways, we started our journey by creating a new, from scratch, carbon crediting protocol focused on leveraging satellite data and combining that with on-the-ground sampling to be tracking soil organic carbon, and to show that that was possible and could happen at a level of rigor that was competitive with existing registry approaches. So that was called the Carbon Plus Grasslands, and is still a credit class. And all of those credits have been sold. As they get produced, they're just purchased immediately. And I think sort of building from that, sort of like taking, okay, if we're going to meet the market where it's at in terms of the current definition of what a carbon credit needs to be, and so we're going to meet that, but we're going to do it in a way that to the highest degree possible leverages these new technologies and approaches and sort of builds a community around that, was sort of how we decided to approach it, which is quite different, I think, than Toucan and Klima and IPCI DAO, which focused at the beginning on the tokenization of existing credits, and which imbues them with new attributes, right? As Joseph was saying, the transformation of these credits from something that's sort of living on a centralized database that has that you have to have permissions to access, that sort of creates a very slow over-the-counter brokerage style of market, to something that is on a public blockchain, as John was mentioning, and opens up the sort of the universe of composability. And I think the different DAO IPCI, I remember talking with them way back in 2017 at DevCon in Cancun, and the difference between now and then is that in 2021, when Toucan brought us these credits on chain, and Klima, the difference is there was an Olympus DAO fork that could be spun up and could purchase those and allow people to sort of speculate on their value in a specific way. There's, Sushi Swap, there was all of this forkable, composable, decentralized finance infrastructure up and running with an enormous amount of liquidity. Back in 2017, that was simply not the case. I mean, we had what, like Ether Delta, basically. And yeah, so there's just a whole different set of and that phase shift, that phase shift from an illiquid over-the-counter asset to a highly liquid asset that is now composable within a DeFi system was really transformative. So there's the world before that, and there's the world after that. And now we've all seen what is possible, or what could be possible, by leveraging that composability and liquidity. However, it's also a cautionary tale, right? Because liquidity, if you have a torrential downpour of rain on a landscape that has no vegetation, the soil erodes out to the ocean. if you have the same torrential downpour on a landscape that's forested and has ponds and terraces, all of that liquidity, that rain, sinks into the soil and it recharges the aquifers. All that water still gets out to the ocean, right? It all still, the springs flow, the rivers flow. It just takes longer, and it's pumped up into trees and it comes down as more rain. So you get all of these little microcycles and other things. This is the same. This metaphor is something we should all be holding in our minds if we want to be exploring what regenerative finance is. So regenerative finance is not the rain dance that calls down a massive amount of liquidity that then erodes the soil out from under our feet. Regenerative finance is seeding the soil and planting the trees and building the check dams so that as the liquidity comes, because come it will, it sinks into the soil and it regenerates our ecosystems and our social systems. And so the metaphor here, I think, is important. The work that we have in front of us to really build a regenerative financial apparatus and the new institutions that are required for all of this is the work of, is the harder work of creating transparent participatory governance structures of porting transparent governance structures that already exist into the digital space, of creating complementary governance structures in the digital space, of including, building out this sensory apparatus and this governance apparatus. This is hard work, but it's what's required to ensure that we can make it rain, and that when it does rain, it sinks in and it really creates a beautiful and abundant planet, which is what we want. And my great fear, I guess, in all of this is that right now, these big boom and bust cycles in crypto, I think are there's sort of like they're healthy in a way, right? You get the market overheat and it collapses, and you're doing, I don't know, in crypto we're sort of like manic bipolar or something. So it's like really hyped, and then everybody's really depressed, and those oscillations will smooth out, I think, over time. But at this moment, we don't have massive adoption or engagement with vulnerable communities yet, right? But as we mature to a place in Web3 in which we have massive adoption of vulnerable communities, we really need to be working hard so that these market cycles aren't rugging vulnerable people. And that's what I'm speaking about in terms of this metaphor of the torrential downpour. When it rains, we don't want the soil to be running away from us. So when the liquidity comes, we just can't be setting up a system in which these massive price movements, which are likely to continue because this is a feature, not a bug, of markets. We just need to think very hard about how we're building these new Web3 institutions. And that's a cautionary and optimistic statement, because I do believe that the sort of the Web3 suite of tools, it is so much more than just composable money and decentralized finance that we're able to explore. We can explore what legitimacy means and how we create it as a community, how we program and govern new institutions, how we create transparency so that all actors have access to the same information. Information parity is a cornerstone of a successful free market, and it doesn't exist in carbon markets right now. And that's one thing I want to make really clear, that is my biggest critique of the legacy carbon markets, which is information parity. And I don't think that this is like a conspiracy, right? I think it's because it's complex information, right? And we haven't had the tools. But information parity, it doesn't exist. Information is highly asymmetric, and oftentimes institutions who are the keepers of that information have incentives to not be super fast with sharing it, right? because there's a lot of institutional inertia around saving face and maintaining your legitimacy, instead of the institutional incentives being around just radical transparency and integrity around even if it's not what you want it to say. And that's the potential of leveraging public blockchains. What gets me excited is far beyond the liquidity and the composability and the automation of markets. It's really in creating the information parity that the globe needs to coordinate on climate action. And that's enormously invigorating. And we have a long way to go to make that true.
Thanks so much, Gregory. That metaphor, that picture that you drew was really great and pretty helpful. And it does seem like, with sort of this history and this telling of where we had started from, where we didn't even have these sort of tools that we take for granted today in the crypto markets, or the crypto ecosystems in 2021, 2022, right? This innovative cycle may now lead to sort of like this last mile of reaching, right, making sure that there are plants for the rain to support and nourish. I know we only have about 10 minutes left on this call. I'd really, if we can maybe take about 3 minutes each to talk about what you guys see in the future of your specific involvement in the climate crypto ecosystem. Yeah, so we can go from there. Joseph, let's do 3 minutes, and then so we can finish on time. Thanks.
Thanks so much. So a few things. Definitely with Blockchain for Climate Foundation and our Bitmo platform, we're now working to secure government users, because the whole concept of this is that we can help build a currently infrastructure deficit or infrastructure light system in Paris Agreement carbon markets by having a platform for national governments to be able to issue their Article 6.2 Paris Agreement carbon credits and inject that into the marketplace. And so this is definitely something that is very key for us. If you or someone you know are a national government or have deep ties and are both into helping beat climate change through markets and are neutral or positive on crypto, please give us a call at Blockchain for Climate. That is a key component. I think the other big meta theme in the space right now is this handoff from off-chain world to on-chain world. There's a lot to discuss there. A concept that a colleague and I had hatched one day was called the Pallant-Weisbord margin with Emma Weisbord, who briefly worked at ICSO, interestingly, some years back. And that was the theoretical optimum spot to bring data from off-chain to on-chain. And ideally, we move this to the left over time, closer to time zero, as we build up all these tools. And so very excited for that work to continue to happen, but also remembering that it may not be an absolute rush to the left. It may not be, gotta get everything on the blockchain right away. And so figuring that out in those iterations are really important. Finally, and I think it's really a sub-theme of that, is the role of the traditional carbon market and the invaluable work that it's done to create standards, offset standards, and the protocols and methodologies within that, which have really been the source of truth around, did we get or keep carbon out of the atmosphere for a long time? That wouldn't have happened without this project in an approvable, countable way. We've seen verified carbon standard as the major carbon offset that's been tokenized on chain. They've said they want to take a step back, do some thinking, and eventually make more official that engagement. But they may take some time there. And so what I think will be interesting as the other traditional carbon offset standards have the opportunity to flood in and fill that gap, as well as the natively on-chain standards like regen and other things that folks are building. What will fill that gap in that pause? Because that gap needs to be filled, because we need to get moving, because we've got a climate and a habitable planet for humanity and a lot of the animals and plants to save and to steward. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, John. 3 minutes.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, first off, a huge thank you to all of you. My intuition was validated. This conversation has been so interesting, and I've learned so much. I've been frantically taking notes on things that I want to go review. So I just want to thank you all for sharing your wisdom and experiences here. You know, for the foreseeable future, our specific involvement from the part of Toucan, this is basically focused on unlocking more ideas and infrastructure to finance the world's most impactful climate projects, all kind of moving towards the aim of redesigning the global economy so that it reflects what actually benefits people and the planet. And I think, to me, this is kind of drives at the essence of regenerative finance, which is a complementing and compatible take to Gregory's. So really it comes down to me to embedding planetary stewardship and human dignity into the fabric of how our financial system works, right? So that simply by using money and owning money and the financial system operating, we're kind of locking in our safety and security as a species on the planet. So to us at Toucan, we see this path from kind of creating these tokenized environmental asset markets to, because these assets are composable with the rest of the financial system, this is going to be kind of embedded into the rest of finance. And so that's something there that we're looking forward to. And that involves, for example, we have an ecosystem advocacy program and grants program where we're giving grants out to promising projects that we see building with tokenized carbon and experimenting with new ideas from the infrastructure side, from the kind of protocol demand side, use cases around retirements, around extending the utility of carbon credits, all of this. And I think, kind of reiterating one of the points I made a bit earlier, we want to build carbon markets that take full advantage of the benefits of both blockchains. I think we have an opportunity and a responsibility here to shed some of the less desirable kind of flaws in the early designs of carbon markets as we go through this process of creating this new kind of carbon 3.0 upgraded infrastructure. And, you know, at Toucan, we believe that the world's environmental asset markets need to run on open systems. This is in large part because of the point that Gregory made around information parity, and this being a key piece of a successful and just free market. But then you know, beyond this, for me personally, I really love the education and advocacy side of this. So learning more, understanding more, helping the world to kind of better get a grasp of how we can sit at this confluence of finance and technology and ecology. And as again, kind of harkening back to Gregory's comments on cybernetics, to me, that's kind of using sensing systems to steer a broader system. And for us, with satellites and with remote sensors, we can measure and monitor the state of the world. By connecting to the financial system, we can modify human behavior in response to those signals. And I think that's like a super powerful mechanism that we're excited to explore.
Amazing. Thank you so much, John. Gregory?
Let's see. So I think so taking a step back and just sort of noting what I'm quite excited about, it's interesting. I mean, this may be surprising, but we've been working very hard for years not to replace legacy registry systems, but to make open source software available for them to govern their standards in a way that makes it easy for them to control the issuance process and choose if and how it goes natively on chain easily, right? But also make that same software and those same tools available for a broader community to start engaging with how more of us may engage with creating new standards for the issuance of ecological credits broadly and carbon credits specifically. Because we do believe that there is the need for massive parallel innovation at this moment, while also creating rigorous filter systems and the ability and third-party verification systems so that the market can make sense of that. It's like we have to both have this Cambrian explosion of options, but also we need to have sort of the ability to filter those options and say, and allow people to express choice in the marketplace and choose what they deem as quality. And over time, we're going to see an equilibrium around that. And my hope is that this process that we're in the middle of is going to pretty radically overhaul what we mean when we talk about carbon units. You know, and I think that I think in 5 years, what people are buying and selling as carbon is going to be very different from the current CO2 equivalent. I hope it is. I hope that we can, you know, sort of evolve things. So I'm really excited and grateful. It's such a collaborative community, and you know, and there's such excitement and inspiration. And I will say, you know, in the midst of this crypto winter, this big bear market cycle we're in, I don't see any signs that the regenerative finance and crypto carbon community is slowing down. I also don't see any signs that it's going to be underfunded. I see only signals that, you know, that broader institutions, as well as those of us who are here sort of in the trenches building, as well as the community of crypto users who are being attracted to this, are all extremely motivated to continue building. And so I think, you know, I just leave with the these sorts of market down cycles are fantastic opportunities to get a lot of work done. So let's go do it.
Thank you so much, Gregory, and thank you all for contributing so much great insight.
Thank you, Daniel. Great
Thanks,
to see you
Daniel.
all.
Crypto hacks are on the rise and constantly in the news, with hundreds of millions of dollars lost every month. Don't be the next big hack everyone's talking about. Get smart and get audited today before it's too late.
Oh, hello there! As we all know, Web3's future looks super bright. I just might need sunglasses to see. Oh, too bad you can't wear glasses properly without ears to support them. Logic, right? But who needs ears when you have talented animators? Awesome work, guys.